Welcome to On the Vineyard. I'm Monica Brady-Meyerov, the publisher of the Vineyard Gazette on Martha's Vineyard. On the Vineyard is sponsored by Crane Appliance. And what a crazy, windy week we had. It blew the ferries off schedule for nearly 2 days. I was one of the many islanders who got trapped on the wrong side of the Sound. After enjoying the long weekend off island, I had to wait another 24 hours for a ferry to take me back. There's always the Patriot boat, but as a colleague of mine reported who took it, it was very choppy. The weather, especially the wind, is always a reminder that we on the island aren't fully in control of our comings and goings. Coming up, an update on bird flu. It's been confirmed on the island, and health officials are making recommendations.
The latest has been to take down any bird feeders.
But first, do you know the Golden Bull restaurant that's sat empty at Five Corners in Vineyard Haven since 2003? It's about to get a new owner. A new restaurant partnership has pitched the Tisbury Planning Board to open 2 restaurants in the space, MV Tap, which would focus on burgers and beer, and Vineyard Caribbean Cuisine. One Tisbury Select Board member remarked that she was excited about getting the space filled because it's the heart of a little hub by the water. That's the sound of the historic press in the Vineyard Gazette offices in Edgartown printing the paper. And that means it's time to check in with Bill Evell, the editor-in-chief, and the reporters on this week's news.
We have Gwen Skiles, who's been following the avian flu outbreak. It's been going on countrywide, statewide, and now on the island too. There has been some preliminary testing after a flock of turkeys and a blue jay have died. Gwen?
Yes, so the 30 turkeys that were found in Edgartown have preliminarily tested positive. Their samples are now in a federal lab getting reviewed, and we should hopefully know soon whether or not it is indeed avian flu.
Now, the state and federal, they have to sort of go through a series of steps, but the state ones, we are saying they did preliminarily test positive, correct?
Yes. It just has to go through multiple tests in order to be confirmed that avian flu is indeed present.
All right, and the turkeys and the blue jay were found in Edgartown, but of course birds fly, so the worry is it could be many places. What should the public know?
So the state is regularly updating guidelines, and the latest has been to take down any bird feeders. Usually birds can gather around the bird feeders, and as they're mingling, they can spread the virus respiratorily, and so it's important to take those down to reduce gathering of birds.
This way they'll just be foraging in the wild and not in big groups. That's the idea there, correct?
Yes.
And you talked to Rob Colbert. He's the Gazette's bird columnist, and he sort of gave some thoughts on how birds survive without bird feeders. They will survive in winter, correct?
Yes, so birds do have extra challenge finding food in the winter, but they do find 90% of it out in the wild, which leaves only 10% from things like bird feeders. So they may struggle a little bit to find food, but overall they shouldn't be impacted too much.
One of the repercussions of all this is there's been a scarcity of eggs and also an increase in prices in eggs, correct?
Yes, so nationally we're seeing an increase in the price of eggs because of the avian flu. Less hens means less eggs, and thus the price is more expensive. But here on the island, farms have not been affected so far, so you could get those local eggs for their normal price.
And although this is a big issue, it is important for us to put out it's not really harmful to humans, at least it hasn't been. It's like small animals like dogs and cats can be affected, though.
Humans can contract the virus, and in some cases it can be fatal. But so far, the humans that have gotten it have had prolonged contact with infected birds. So it's not very much of a concern right now. But for pets, especially cats, it can be fatal as well. So keeping dogs on a leash, keeping cats indoors, and making sure that you don't bring bird feces into your house is crucial during this time.
If anybody sees a dead bird, who should they call?
So one dead bird doesn't mean that avian flu is present. So the state is encouraging that groups of 5 or more in the same location be reported to Mass Wildlife. And we have those links in our printed story.
All right. Thanks so much, Gwen, and we will continue to follow the story.
Thank you.
Turning now to Ethan Genter, who was checking in on a story on the state forest. We first began reporting this in the fall. The state has a plan to potentially clear cut 175 acres of white pine. There is a group on island that Ethan was talking to that is made up of conservationists, fire department, also the Martha's Vineyard Commission, who are in favor of this plan. Correct, Ethan?
That's right, Bill. This is the State Forest Task Force. It was formed by the Martha's Vineyard Commission to kind of look at a whole host of different issues in the forest. Obviously, this is the one that's kind of on a lot of people's minds. It kind of prompted a lot of backlash back in the fall when we first reported on it. And this group says, there's a lot of different facets to this idea and kind of the reasoning behind it, but they see it as a win for the forest, ecology, and fire safety.
Yeah, it's very interesting because it's such a broad swath of folks here. And as you said, when we reported it in the fall, it was mostly a backlash. And so to have this group of islanders come forth and say that this is actually a good plan based on a few different situations, correct?
Yeah, and they've been working with DCR. One of the early criticisms of the project was you're replacing trees with a grassland. That's kind of the first one a lot of people had issues with. The task force says, we have these pine trees. They're pretty prominent in New England. They're not hard to find, and they're not really natural to the forest. They were put there for a lumber industry back in the 1920s. And one of the things they want to try and get towards is this very rare sandplain grassland habitat that we don't really have anywhere else around the area. We're actually one of the few left in the world.
Tell me a little bit about the white pine.
Yeah, so this is over, it's by Fire Lane 12, if people are that familiar. It's kind of the southeast corner of the forest in Edgartown. And it was kind of first planted as kind of rows of pines for this lumber industry. It's since kind of gotten overgrown. Trees kind of gone everywhere. It's got a large canopy where, people say we don't really have much growing up underneath it just because there's a lot of shade. What they want to get to is a sand plain, which we have them now. So it's kind of these more open vistas. You kind of have a lot of shrubbery, scrub pine, you got oak, scrub oak, some of these different kind of smaller trees. It's just a lot more open. There's grass everywhere. If you're a regular in the state forest, you've kind of seen this.
Where it allows more sunlight in and it isn't such a monoculture, as they say, what happens with the white pine area.
Yeah, correct. There's a lot more different species all together, kind of commingling.
I also found it interesting because a lot of it has to do with fire mitigation, and folks have said in the past when they were pushing back against it that the sand plains could have more fires. They could be, especially when it gets droughts and things like that, which this group said yes, but the fire department was talking about those are easier fires to fight, correct?
Yeah, so it depends on what you're more concerned about. So getting rid of all these trees in the forest and going back to this kind of very shrubby grassland area, very much easier for wildfires, grass fires. These things can start much easier in this kind of area. But what Alex Schaefer over in Edgartown Fire Chief said, those kind of fires, we know how to handle that. We are very good at putting those out. The other ones we don't really deal with. We never really get they call it a crown fire, where the tops of these giant pine trees, if they catch fire, you kind of have embers that can drift for miles. You all of a sudden have lots of different fires in different spots. And one of the things that they said was, if that kind of fire does happen on the island, it's less likely to happen. But if it does, we don't really have the manpower and the equipment to handle it. They said, we would probably have to call in aerial crews off island to deal with it. And the kind of conditions that would lead to such a fire would probably mean similar conditions around the state. So they're worried that, if this does happen, the state might be already spread thin in other places.
All right. Thanks, Ethan. Thanks for illuminating all the nuances of this issue.
You can read more on these stories in the Vineyard Gazette, which you can subscribe to and have delivered to you anywhere in the country or the world, or at vineyardgazette.com, our free news website. And the Vineyard says goodbye to Floyd Norton of Edgartown, who died at his home after suffering a stroke. He was 95. Born in Oak Bluffs, one of his early jobs was working alongside his father, building the very first Chappie Ferry on time. He left the vineyard for the majority of his career, but came back after he retired and began a second career in real estate, and then was a captain on the Chappie Ferry, and then a charter boat captain. Born Floyd C. Norton on August 5, 1929, died February 14, 2025, at his home surrounded by his family. Do you know the Golden Bull restaurant that's sat empty at Five Corners in Vineyard Haven since 2023? It's about to get a new owner. A new restaurant partnership has pitched the Tisbury Planning Board to open 2 restaurants in the space: MV Tap, which would focus on burgers and beer, and Vineyard Caribbean Cuisine. One Tisbury Select Board member remarked that she was excited about getting the space filled because it's the heart of a little hub by the water. And it's time to vote for Best of the Vineyard. Martha's Vineyard Magazine's yearly contest now has 100 categories, and anyone can vote at mvmagazine.com. Do you have a favorite florist, lobster roll? And new categories this year, vote for your best barber, island-grown oysters, or tour company, all at mvmagazine.com. Tell your friends about Best of the Vineyard voting and about this podcast so they know to vote. Speaking of the best chocolate chip cookie is not part of Best of the Vineyard voting. But in The Vine, our free color newsprint publication, you can see a review of 12 island-baked cookies. They aren't ranked because how could they be? Everyone has their own preferences. I like mine chewy. But I did get to taste many of them myself because Susie Middleton, editor of The Vine and Cook the Vineyard, dropped off bags of cookies that she just had to get out of her house. You can read the reviews and see the cookies at vineyardgazette.com/vine. Thanks to our sponsor, Crane Appliance. Even the best appliances need to be repaired from time to time. When you purchase from Crane Appliance, you become family and get their full support and expertise should something go wrong. Crane Appliance, they call the Cape and Islands home. Our theme music is from vineyarder Michael Hayden. Thanks for listening to On the Vineyard. See you next week.